Hey everybody, welcome back to Sounds Like a Drum, Cadence Independent Media Production. Today, we are talking about drum teching, studio teching. What is it? What does it entail? Experiences. We're going all the way in. The main thing we do here at Sounds Like a Drum is talk about sound, tone, tuning, how to get a sound that you're after. But what do you do when you're going after a sound that's not the one you're after? It's the one that somebody else is after who may even be paying you to get that sound for them so that they can play the way they want. Now, before we talk about what teching is, let's talk about what it isn't. Sorry. Okay. Cool, thanks. What teching is not is bringing a ton of drums to the session. What teching is not is going and buying drum heads for a session, or maybe bringing a ton of cymbals for somebody to use. What we're talking about here is the idea that someone is hiring you to help them get a sound out of their stuff that's going to facilitate the music that they're trying to make, and hopefully do it faster than if they were saddled with doing it themselves. What this necessitates is being able to not just generate your sound, and we do talk about your sound or my sound here a lot. This is about someone telling you about a sound or maybe showing you a sound, and you being able to generate that out of the equipment that you're given. Of course, there are limitations when it comes to the gear being used, the sizes, the room, all of that stuff, but we can't be bothered with limitations in this context. In this case, we are figuring out how to do the best possible job with the things that we're given. That's the only thing we're concerned with. This brings us to the first thing that's going to get in our way, which is the equipment presented to us. Hopefully, everything is in functional working order. Hopefully, the gear that they have is in the direction we need to go with the sound that they're looking for. But above all, we need to be able to assess everything, figure out if anything is broken or needs fixing, what might need to be adjusted before we start tuning and going after a sound and knocking out all of that. Being known as a player in performing circles as someone that gets a really great sound and more importantly gets that sound really quickly, I've had the opportunity to tech a fair amount of sessions, both record sessions or for video shoots, things like that over the years. And all of the time that I've spent learning how to quickly get a sound that I need for sessions that I'm playing on has allowed me to be able to interpret what the needs are of players who maybe have less tuning experience or maybe want to explore new things that are outside of their comfort zone. This has included working on the most recent Gojira record. It includes a lot of indie records that have gone on in New York and also back in Seattle where I'm from, where there's just not a lot of time. And sometimes even the player can't be there to get their sound, and so they need to bring someone in locally who can iron it out before they even arrive. In preparation for going into a teching opportunity, there are a few things that I like to know up front that I want to share with you. First of all, I want to know that Cartage or the artist is going to have their drums ready when I'm getting there to help out. I want to know what the state of the drum heads are going to be. Usually they have fresh ones getting brought in, especially if there's anyone shooting video, so they look lovely. And I also want to know if they're going after the sort of sound that they generally have used in the past, or if they're trying to go in a new direction, because I'm going to do listening research ahead of time of that artist in particular before I go in so that I have a sense of what they're going to be looking for. Since there's been a lot of interest in the comments and just, through the community about my experience working with Gojira, we're going to use that as a sort of framework to talk about how all of these things can present themselves as you go in cold, working through the process of getting the drums recorded for the artist. In the case of working with them, Mario has his own drums that he loves. He wants to use them for the session. We came in right out of the gate. first thing to know is we got to change all of the drum heads because we want to start fresh, and we're going to be changing them often because this particular drummer is a very, very heavy hitter. So keeping in line with that and making sure that we have a consistent sound through the session is going to involve a lot of drum head changes. This means making sure that if at all possible, there's a power drill with a drum key in it on hand so that we can NASCAR style change the heads super duper fast. And also making sure that there are plenty of extras, which in this case, his head company was happy to send. Now, working with a band that has records that they've already produced and completed that they are happy with the sound on means that I have a place to start. In the case of this, I went back and listened to a bunch of the music ahead of time, tried to really focus on not just the tone and sound of the drum, but also the pitch range that they tended to live in. I got a rough idea of the pitches of all of the drums. And then I considered the possibility that we were going to maybe be changing that up a little bit because of some desires that had been indicated about how they wanted to make this record a little bit different. Once getting in, having done some research and understanding what I'm looking at with the kit, I had a day to myself to make adjustments to get it in the ballpark and just to test before we did any actual tracking, which is a luxury that's not always available, but in this case it was. Once everything was where it needed to be in terms of pitch and feel for all of the drums, I made recordings just with my phone of every single one of the drums with a few different dynamic hits so that I could keep track of the pitch range that they were in and also some degree of the tone that they were behaving. Now, some of the hurdles that come into a situation like this one, where it's a larger kit with multiple toms, 2 bass drums, all of that stuff, is getting everything to sound like a family. And this means that all of the experience coming from working here and on my own sessions about the way that the two heads interact pitch-wise, what it means to muffle one of them versus the other, all of that allowed me to very quickly get all of the drums to sound like they belong together and not have an outlier that was going to be troublesome in the mix. When you're dealing with really energetic, really aggressive music, the way that the drums respond needs to be really, really similar, because if they're not, if one of them chokes out more than another, or if one of them sings more than another, all of that busy, aggressive playing is going to sound unbalanced in the mix because of how much of it is in the room mics, which are going to be what they are. You can't just throw faders on those. For those of you working in the metal and extreme metal scene, you're probably aware that on many, I almost want to say most records that we're hearing these days, there are sample supplementations going on to most of the kit, if not outright sound replacement. In the case of this session, they were very, very serious about going with acoustic drum sounds recorded in an old school way, in the way that our favorite metal records from the 80s sounded, you know, the classic Slayer, stuff like that, where you are hearing real drums hit really, really hard, really, really fast, but that have the kind of presence and power that only acoustic drums can generate because they are acoustic drums. This meant that there was a much bigger magnifying glass on every nuance of the behavior of everything on the kit, from crosstalk between the toms and the snare to whether or not the floor tom was getting activated by the bass drums. It even included bringing in not 1, not 2, but 3 possible bell brass snare drums that each had slightly different setups to figure out what was going to work the best for the record. Another thing that needs to be addressed if you're on a session, no matter the style, no matter the nature of the drums, is if you are a person who's going to be checking the sound of the drums, it's very important that you understand the manner in which the player who will ultimately be performing on them hits those drums. In the case of the Gojira session, I play 5/As. I don't hit that hard. People have commented on it plenty. Mario plays some of the biggest sticks I've ever seen, and he hits the drums like his life depends on it, and it is an incredible thing to see. I don't have the physical capacity to hit them as hard as he does, so I made sure when I was checking each of them to hit them as hard as I could, and then when he came in, it was pretty close. There were still some tweaks that had to be made afterward, but it was still really important to understand the way that they're going to be approaching their drums. No matter the size or nature of a session that you might be working on, it's very, very important to realize that in addition to the drummer being your closest confidant about how we are working with the sound of the kit, because they're going to be hitting it, we must make friends with the engineer, because their feedback is going to tell us even more than the drummer's feedback in terms of the sound, because in working on a record, we're working on a recorded sound. So no matter how good the drums may sound in the room and no matter how happy the drummer may be, if the engineer's not getting what they need out of the drums once they're mic'd, there's nothing we can do, except that we are there to fix that. So this is our exact job. And this means that several times, for instance, on this session, 3 toms, the middle one acting up in the control room, but sounded fine in the room. I never would have known if the engineer hadn't been giving me thumbs up on the first tom, thumbs up on the third tom, and a little ugh on the second one. So go in, listen, come back out, work with them, because hitting them all as hard as you can't really tell in the room that there's anything misbehaving, but the end result is what we're after, and that's in the control room. One of the fastest ways to break a friendship with an engineer is to change anything in the room on the drums that they themselves have placed. And what we're specifically talking about here is the microphones. If you need to take a microphone off, if you need to adjust anything, if something is in the way, always check with the engineer, because the sound difference between this and this is a lot more significant than you might think. And if they don't know that you did that, you can end up with a take that has a problem in it. You're not going to know till it's done. And if you're the only person in there, then they're going to know that you touched something. At this point, the concept of teching for someone might seem daunting. It's an awful lot of stuff to keep in mind. It's a lot of risk on the line, really, by saying, I'm going to walk in, I'm going to help you get your sound, and I'm going to help you maintain it through the course of what may be a multi-day session. But having said that, it's also a really rewarding experience, and I have to say that working with people that are outside of your maybe chosen genre or musics that you love, it can only give you a higher headroom and better experience toward being able to adjust and learn and play in your own music, even if you never play, like extreme metal, for instance, or country or whatever it might be. One of the things that we have learned in the course of this channel that an awful lot of players are really afraid of is the possibility of adjusting something on a drum set tuning-wise and not being able to get back to it. The possibility that you can't fix something that you changed. When it comes to teching, and especially if it's someone who is really swinging for the fences, you are going to need to be able to bring things back to where they were very, very quickly. That means that if a lug is loose, cool, okay. The player might not know, but you need to keep an eye on if the sound is changing or if they are starting to notice something maybe rattling or that the sound of the snare drum is starting to get screwed up. Plenty of stopgap measures that you can put in to adjust for things like this, but it requires a certain degree of confidence that you can not only do a job, but that you can recreate it and fix issues very, very quickly, which is all the more reason to always be practicing tuning on our own and experimenting, making sure that we can recreate sounds and making sure that we can get a sound that we have in our heads. So as a tech, what if it's a sound that you've never made before? Well, it turns out that almost all of the teching that I've done, they asked me for sounds that are not at all inside of the sounds that I make for myself. And that means for me that just like a chef understanding ingredients, just like anybody understanding the constituent parts that make the thing that they normally do, we need to be able to use those ingredients to make other recipes. And that is why it's so crucial to make sure that you step outside of your comfort zone, no matter how narrow, no matter how wide it might be, and learn to take input about a sound from anybody, even just, from a recording that you're listening to, and figure out how to make it. Because if I only made the sounds that I like to make, I would be of no use to somebody that wants their record to sound like classic, thrash metal, because that is really, really different. And it includes different sorts of heads, different degrees of muffling. As you can see, we have a little bit of muffling today just to experiment with that because we felt like it. And even more so, something as simple as really, really, really resonant drums. A lot of modern drums are a lot more resonant than the drums that I use, and so I need to know how to mitigate that if I'm going in and saying that I can make your sound for you. All of these things in furtherance of being a good person in what is functionally a service industry. Make no mistake, being a tech is service industry. If you've ever worked in a restaurant, if you've ever, pulled shots in a cafe, whatever it is, we are in a position here where our egos cannot be a part of this. Our ego needs to only be couched in that we are capable of doing the thing that our client needs. And similarly to being a freelancer as a session musician or whatever it might be, our ego comes to bear in terms of the quality of our work. But we have to make sure that the client is happy. And that means that if he wants to use heads that I think might be inappropriate, I have to let that go. If he wants to tune the drums way lower than I think are appropriate, but they work for him and that's what he wants, I have to let it go. If the client is telling me that there's something wrong with the sound, that is physically wrong on the kit, that's their prerogative. I am here to fix that problem. So no matter what it is, we need to have enough experience, enough confidence, enough, we'll call it positive ego, that we know that we can do what we're being asked to do. The worst thing that can happen is waste somebody's time who is on the clock, and doubly so if there's a lot of money on the line or if there's not very much time. And at the end of the day, if we are making things easier, if we are making their job easier to get what they need, then they're going to call us again. The beautiful thing about all of this information and all of this knowledge is that it's still extremely valuable even if you never have any intention of teching somebody else's drum session. This is all in furtherance of the whole philosophy we have here of exploration, expansion, giving yourself more headroom, and finding inspiration in the drums themselves without necessarily having to buy more gear or follow some kind of trend that's going on right now. There's always room for expansion, and there's always someone doing something slightly differently, a little left of center, that can give us something new to work with that's going to make our playing more fun, our music more fun, make our band enjoy our playing a little bit more, whatever it might be. And even a hypothetical scenario where you have to make sounds that are not your own is going to give you a huge insight into the possibilities of the drums. And that about does it for today. Thanks so much for watching. Please shoot over to the Patreon. The link is below. Lots of extra content over there. It is the best way to help us continue to get to do this. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and please tell us either if you have teched a session, what happened, or if you have played a session that was teched, what happened there too. Dying to know. Oh, and of course, thanks so much to the tech on today's session. It really made things move a lot smoother. I hadn't noticed that lug had gotten loose. We appreciate it. Thank you.